fellow travelers, and welcome to another episode of the Versus Stars Podcast third season. My loyal listeners, thank you for your continued support. This is an amazing episode because Dan Didio returns to the mothership to discuss Defenders of the Earth from Mandrake Studios. Now come aboard as we go traversing the stars.
Hi, Mr. Didio. Thank you so much for coming to Virgin Stars Podcast. Coming back to the Virgin Stars
Thank you.
Podcast.
Thanks for having me, man. It's good to be back.
So my pleasure. Like I said, I was a big fan of yours the last time, and I'm a big fan of yours again. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So you're now the writer for upcoming comic book called The Defenders of Earth from Mad Cave Studios. So how do you get involved in the series?
It was actually by coincidence. Mike Martz, who's one of the, I guess, vice presidents over at Mad Cave, we used to work together back at DC. I was just stopping by to see him over at his booth in San Diego of last year. And we were just sitting there chatting, and he was telling me about different things he was working on, and he mentioned Defenders of the Earth to me. It was a project that I was always interested in. My background before being in comics was in animation, and I was aware of a lot of animated series that were on the air 80s into 90s. I worked on a number of shows myself in the 90s, so I was familiar with a lot of these series. We just chatted about it, and as he talked to me about the series, it just got me going, and I kept on walking away from his booth and coming back, and about 2 or 3 times I had developed a complete pitch while walking the floor over the floor at San Diego. So I pitched him the whole thing, and we went forward from there. By the time we got to New York Comic Con, we were off to the races.
I mean, The Defenders of Earth, I remember the characters. As an 80s kid, I remember the series, but it's still a little bit of a deep cut. So what did you remember most about the series, and what was the elements of the series you wanted most to emulate in your comic book series?
It's the same two things. I always felt it was incongruous to have Flash Gordon, Mandrake, and the Phantom in the same show. Each one of them has a very particular style of storytelling. Phantom, is very either jungle or urban feel, and it's very gritty. Flash Gordon's high sci-fi, and then Mandrake has a little bit of fantasy and magic involved in it. So all three of them are very completely different, and I find that attractive. The idea of finding reasons why they'd be together, why would they be friends, what would they work on together, how can they help support each other, and once you start to explore that story, that was a lot of fun. But the show had that one extra element, which was the sons and daughters and wards of these heroes. And you have Lothar and his son, Flash and his son, the Phantom and his daughter, and then Mandrake and basically his ward, his adopted son. So you have these 4 kids, and you have the 4 adults, so you can play a generational tale against these weirdly different characters too.
So I think for a lot of fans that are not aware, Flash Gordon was created in 1934. Mandrake 1934, Phantom created in 1936. These characters all predate Batman, Superman. These are comic book heroes prior to the ones everyone just assumes was like the great 2 that started the whole thing. What do you think has been the key to their longevity? Yeah, go ahead.
I think there's a couple of things, because I actually had a chance before even working on this. I had done some work with the Condé Nast people building a book on the Street and Smith characters, which are basically Doc Savage and the Shadow, and a lot of those same aspects of these characters that predate the superheroes, I find intriguing. And I think one of the things that keeps them alive is the fact that they were syndicated strips, and these syndicated strips continued into the 70s, 80s, and possibly continue today. I'm not really sure if they're still going or not, but there was a constant exposure of these characters, so they were never really out of the limelight. They might not have fared in the same way, in the same comic book vein as a lot of the characters we know, but they were still out there being published with new stories and finding new readers.
Now, I know you, as you talked about their background, for where these characters take place is tonally very, is very different. But tonally, because I don't remember the comic books, I was a little before my time when I was reading comic books. Were they tonally different in how they were presented, each character?
When they did the comic series, the backstory on the animated series back in the 80s and 90s was it was actually produced by Marvel Studios. It was actually developed by the people of Marvel Comics that had started their own animation studio at that time as part of New World Features. And during that period of time, they were doing work for hire, and this was one of the work for hires. So they brought a lot of the storytelling aspects that they put into the comics into the animated series and development it. So there was a lot more depth to these characters than you might have seen in more traditional cartoons at that time. More so, even so, the fact that in the very first episode, although they never mention her by name, Dale, Flash's wife, is killed. And she dies in the very first episode, which is shocking in so many levels because you expect her to be an ongoing member of the story, and she wasn't. And they touch upon some adult themes during the course of the series as well that really keeps it in its own bracket in regards to the type of audience it was trying to attract. And I think that's why it sticks with a lot of people because it felt more mature than some of the other material that might have been presented at the same time for kids to watch.
Well, I mean, one of the challenges you must be dealing with is that these characters, especially Flash Gordon and Phantom, I think are probably better known than Mandrake over the course of the decades.
Yeah.
Is that you have fans of the characters themselves, fans of the cartoon itself, fans of Phantom, let's say the movie with Billy Zane. I mean, there's a lot of different iterations of these characters that play out over the decades. Were you more concerned about keeping true to the fan base of the cartoon or the fan bases of the individual characters over the years?
I think you could play the two. I mean, they had made some changes in the animated series with the characters, gave them different types of powers, like even Lothar, much stronger on the TV show than he was in the Mandrake series. They gave the Phantom the powers of 10 tigers, which he calls upon to power up every once in a while. So there's a lot of fun aspects of that, and I touch upon a lot of those bits and pieces in the series. You have to realize what you're doing. I'm building a show called building a book called Defender of the Earth based on an animated series. The fans of that animated series are probably going to be the ones that are gravitating to the book, and I have to have some aspects of connection to what that series was about in order to really feel that it's being true to what their expectations might be. So it was a fun process. The best part I can say about the process was when I first pitched the series, I had a lot of ideas about what I wanted to do with the characters, and I wrote them all out and put them all together. Then after I completed that, I went back and I rewatched the animated series, and I was pleasantly surprised to find a lot of the storylines and touch points that I was creating in the series what types of stories they did during the course of the series when it was on the air. So it feels like we both are coming from the same place and telling the same style of story, although I might approach it slightly differently because I'm telling the story 30, 35 years later, you know?
Now, if I remember the solicits correctly, and my reading comprehension is okay, my understanding is that the comic book does come directly from the storylines of the cartoon. So my
Yeah.
understanding is that this is a continuation of the cartoon. Is that accurate or not accurate?
Uh, it's accurate up to a point, meaning it takes upon themes and ideas from the cartoon. It plays them much more dramatically, meaning that in the cartoon, Ming was attacking Earth and focused his most of attacks, regardless, on Flash and his friends. I explored that idea a little bit further, and I expanded on the idea, meaning that if Ming's attacking Earth, he's attacking Earth. So it's a war of the worlds, not just a war between Flash and Ming, which is that more traditional story. So you feel that this is much more a higher stakes game right from the start of the book than you might have gotten a sense from the cartoon itself. Also, there's a lot more risk involved. There's a lot more drama. There's a lot more danger as the story goes. But I want to catch some of the same type of energy and craziness that the series had in the book. So you're constantly walking that tightrope between grounding the characters in a level of reality while playing the big fantasy and the big science fiction aspects of the stories too.
So is the continuity of the TV show, is at least knowledge of it, do you have to know that to understand what's going on in this?
No, I'm a very firm believer of the old adage that a book should be created for somebody who's a first-time reader. So therefore, there's anything that happens in the book. If you saw the show, you'd be nodding and understanding and going along with the story. If you never saw the show, you could just pick the book up and enjoy it for what it is.
Now, a couple of things as you talk about updating it. Obviously, as you mentioned, and we all mentioned that sensibilities have changed over the last 40 years, and actually since the 30s. One character is Ming the Merciless. Obviously, Ming the Merciless back in the day was definitely kind of more of an Asian stereotype villain kind of thing.
Yeah.
How do you update him for 2024 and make him his own character that kind of fits into our time period?
Well, I mean, I deal with Ming in the very first episode, and he comes back in flashback in other aspects of the story, but I really focus more on there were other characters in the series that were the villains that I were interested in. I'm focusing on Ming's children, which are Crotan and Castra, which appeared in the series. And I'm also focusing on the Phantom's brother, Kurt Walker, and bringing some aspect into there, and then creating some other new dramas around those too. So Ming is the catalyst to start the story moving forward, but reality is he's not a primary player throughout this. The reason why is that Medcave has a number of Flash Gordon properties moving forward simultaneously. And because I have a book that is really an ensemble cast and a very large ensemble, I mean, there are 8 primary characters if you count the 4 heroes and their 4 offspring. So I have these 8 primary characters. So I have a lot of characters to service, a lot of story to do within them. And I wanted to get a different type of villain in there to give me a different type of story than what the animated series was.
So my understanding from what you just said is that all these characters are going to spin off into their own books. That's what I'm hearing.
I hope not. I mean, listen, I'm having a blast. I love ensemble books. It's a real challenge because you're always making sure everybody's getting the proper amount of time, the proper amount of development, and having an own story themselves. And the good part is with an 8-part series, I do have time to really focus on a different character every book while all the other characters are participating in the story and moving a single story forward throughout the entire process.
Now, with each superhero having, or each hero, I said superhero, they're probably heroes, not quite super, having their children involved, is each hero equally comfortable with having their ward or child involved in the dangers that they're facing?
The good part is that each one there's a different dynamic between each of the kids. You'll see that we start with Rick and Flash's relationship right from the start, and you find out that Rick has been away at school, so he hasn't seen his father for a couple of years, and there's been some distance between the two of them, and their relationship has gotten shaky because of this. Then you find out there's a reason for the Phantom. Phantom hasn't been able to return back to his homeland, back to Africa, and because of that, he's lost complete contact with his daughter. And because of that, his daughter has gone on a different path than he wants, and he's trying to find a way to get to her. And then LJ and Lothar are probably the closest relationship of the two. And but the difference between them is that there's an antagonistic relationship between LJ's father and mother, and therefore he's playing peacekeeper between the two of them. So he's thrown in a weird spot. And with Kashin, who is the ward or adopted son of Mandrake, there's absolutely been no connection between the two, and he's actually gone off on his own path, independent of Mandrake, because Mandrake has been focused on other things going on. So everybody's had these relationships sort of fractured a little bit and been evolving in different ways than you might have seen in the series. And it's, again, for everybody to try to reinterpret how they are working with each other, and more importantly, who they are going together forward,
It can't be easy to be balancing or juggling 8 different primary characters. Because not only you only have, was it 22 pages per issue?
24.
How are you 24? How are you determining how to, especially because readers, they kind of want to know things immediately. They're very like antsy about things. So how hard is it to balance stories for 8 different characters, 24 pages, given however many issues you've worked on so far?
Well, if I start a story, I have it mapped out on where it's going to end. Let's put it that way. So I make sure that every beat is resolved. I know I have 8 issues, so I know I have a beginning, middle, and end of everything. So you don't want to go too far in depth with these characters, but you do have a chance for them to shine. And there's a lot of explanations, and what I do is, like I said, I change the focus a little bit. So in the first issue, it's really about Flash and Rick and what happens around them. And then in the second issue, it's about Lothar back in Africa, and his story gets you a little bit into the Phantom. And then it's the Phantom story in the third issue. In the fourth issue, we go back to Flash again, and then Flash sort of pulls the whole team together, and we start to roll from there. It's an old trick I learned while working in animation, believe it or not. When you're building a story, you always want to create cut points for your stories when you're in animation, or as we used to say, leading into commercial breaks. So you're constantly asking questions, and that leads you into the next story beat that takes you to the next story beat, and the main story that might be in one issue that gets some level of resolution, but the B storyline or C storyline might fold into the next issue, and then that gets resolved there, and then you sort of move the ball down. So you just got to make sure you don't forget something along the way. That's the biggest concern.
Well, what I heard you say though is that it's only 8 issues. Is this 8 issues with potential for more than 8 issues, or is this 8 issues of stopping at 8 issues?
Look, it's here's the thing I always say. My biggest problem with any sort of media is anybody starting to worry about the sequel before they tell the first story. Because if you don't, if you're worrying and keeping everything for later, you may never get that later, and you're going to shortchange the story that you're telling. So for me, I have a big story that's told with a beginning, middle, and end. Might have somewhat of a cliffhanger at the end, but that's okay. For the most part, the story's complete. But the reality is, I worry about a second arc of books, only if the first arc works well. So my goal is really to make sure the first arc works really well and people want more, and then we'll figure it out when we get there.
So what I'm hearing is there's potential for more. That's what I got out of all that.
Yeah, there's always potential for more. There's always potential for more. I mean, I'm interested. Like I said, for me, I'm having a lot of fun with the Phantom, which has been intriguing for me, and because of that, I'd love to be able to focus on individual characters more so than the ensemble, because that does get daunting and tiresome after a while. But and you could get more into the characters and give you more depth to the characters and more of the story with the characters when you have a single character story. But the good part is these characters are so well developed that I'm allowed to really move them forward a little bit quicker because people know where they're about. I don't have to really fully reestablish them right from the beginning. It's not like an introduction to the characters. It's we pick up right in the middle of the story and we run from there.
So one thing I also read in the solicits is that it says that each hero must deal with their inner demons. Now,
Yeah.
what kind of inner demons are we talking about? Can you expand on which characters are dealing with which inner demons, as it were?
Yeah, I mean, each character has his own issues. With Flash, here's a character who is an action character, lives by action, and then he gets thrown into more not a diplomatic role, but much more of a negotiating role where he has to help other people move things forward. And he feels uncomfortable in doing that because he's not playing to his strengths. And he feels along the way he's compromised himself a little too much. And some of the people might agree with him, mainly his son. And he's trying to find the balance of keeping everybody happy and then finding out that that might not be the best way to approach things. With Mandrake, this is a character who's given up his show life, so to speak, to be a hero. But he's also aware of so many other things around him that he's trying to balance a personal life against a professional, against a heroic life, and realizes that it's very hard to find the mid ground between those two, and it's either one or the other. Phantom is probably the one that goes through the most changes. Something dramatic happens to the Phantom early in the story that forces him to stay away from Africa and not return to his homeland. Because of that, events occur in Africa that really weaken his authority there and his reputation there. And because of that, he's struggling to find a way back home, even though it's almost an impossible task. And then Lothar is a guy who was the reluctant chieftain of the Seven Nations. He'd rather travel the world in a much less with less of the authority and burden that comes along with being a chieftain. But again, he has to reassume that role because of the threats that are occurring in the Seven Nations and how they're coming apart without him there. So he has to return as the king, even though he doesn't really want that role, or even more so, the new king doesn't, or the new chieftain doesn't want him there that much either.
So when you're developing these character flaws or traits, were these already present in the original and stories of them, or did something when you were thinking about your story, you thought to yourself, these characters really would be like this in a real world setting?
I'm trying to play the real world thing. What would happen? Because the story takes place, we arbitrarily 4 to 5 years after the conclusion of the animated series, or what we call the conclusion of the animated series, when the first war with Mings and Mongo is over. And so the world itself has been broken and beaten, and it's in a rebuilding phase. And what Flash is trying to do is fix the world faster than it's supposed to be fixed. And he's making a lot of choices that at the end seem to get you to the conclusion and to a better place faster. But he realizes pretty quickly there's a lot of compromises they made that actually might be a greater threat than what was happening to the world when it was in rebuilding stage. So there's a lot of things that are happening. And I always say this, I use the expression, he's making so many quick decisions and so many quick choices. When you look at the aggregate, you wonder, how did I get to this bad place? And because all the choices seem good along the way, but at the end, we're in a much more dangerous world than when we thought it was going to be. And ultimately, he has to spring back into action and bring the team back together so that they can, solve these problems that now have been these new set of problems that are rising in the world.
Well, I think it's fascinating, and I really do love the combination of the characters like Flash Gordon and Phantom, all and Mandrake on the same world. Because when you think about Flash Gordon, very dealing with aliens, space travel, stuff like that. How does the Earth? I mean, is it taking place in 2024 or this far in the future?
I'm putting it in the Defenders of the Earth version of 2024. How about that? There's a lot of sci-fi tech involved in there, which is a lot of fun. I mean, you got to understand that if you're at a war with an alien world that has all this high-end technology, sooner or later that technology is going to come into your world and become part of your natural society, and that's part of what the story is all about. And because of that, there's pluses to that, but also there's negatives to that happening, and ultimately, that's where the struggle becomes. And it's like I said, because the first fight is they're not fighting against anything except just society and just the normal problems of daily life, and then they start to realize there's a greater threat underneath that, and then they have to mobilize, and the choices they have to make ultimately would throw the world back into a point of disarray. And there's the question that we ask at the start of the story: what's it like trying to save a world that doesn't want saving? Because ultimately, a lot of people have made compromises and choices, and they'd rather live in a much more authoritarian society, and have the comforts of home than not have the comforts and have the liberties that you used to experience. And they're trying to battle this and trying to reignite the people, and finding out that there's something else at work that's actually weakening the wills of the world, so to speak, and they're the ones that are seeing it, and they're having a hard time getting anybody else to see it.
I mean, I think one of the coolest things about, like I said, the idea, as you mentioned as well, is the idea of how does the world handle this jump start into the future, technology wise,
Yeah.
because they didn't, the whole idea is in civilization that, as you become more grow as a species, you get more technologically advanced. You're supposed to
Right.
come hand in hand. You're not supposed to be like, hey, this is 100 years, 200, 300 years future jumping in you right now to you right this second.
Yeah.
What does that do to a society when suddenly, all of a sudden, they not only do they have an understanding of the bigger universe itself, but now they're being thrown into this future tech that they weren't really building towards at that moment.
And there's a line in the very first issue that says basically once this technology is offered to them and they take it, they were able to build the world in 5 years what would have taken 20 to 40 years to do. So they've shortened this timeline of hardship on the world by taking on this technology. But like I said, it's a little bit of a Pandora's box. Once you open up that technology, the people are exposed to things that ultimately weaken the society as a whole.
So, in your opinion, we're probably not better off being pushed forward several hundred years into the future, technology-wise, suddenly.
And that's part of the argument. What I love about any story is showing both sides of the argument, because then it's really about, you want to get that sense of choice and determination about what's right and what's wrong. And sooner or later during the course of your story, there's a clear path on where they should be going and the choices that they need to be making, even if people disagree with them or will challenge them on it. But at the early stages of it, it really is a question of, do we really give up all this that's helped us advance ourselves and get ourselves to a spot quicker? Because what we're giving up doesn't seem that bad until it turns really bad. And then you can't get out of the hole.
Another thing that kind of pops in my brain too is the idea of, we talk about the technology advancement, right? Then you have Mandrake, who's magic based.
Right.
And I remember the quote, I'm going to butcher the idea that any technology advanced enough will be indistinguishable from magic.
Right.
Now, how does magic exist in a world where now suddenly technology is so far advanced in that idea.
I use a line in it. There's a huge magical storyline that moves through the story. Actually a very integral part of the storyline dealing with magic. And when somebody asks about the magic, Mandrake explains it's magic. Um, and if he goes, I says, and if I let you in on the trick, then it's not magic anymore. So his answer is basically, it's magic as long as I keep it mysterious. And if you understand what it is or how I did it, it stops being magic and all of the magic disappears. So there's the mystery that comes behind magic, the power that comes behind with it. So therefore, it's very limited about what it can do and how it is used. But it's used in a very big way in the story, and it affects really realistically how all our characters interact with each other because of that.
So, like, Ming, does he have a concept of magic prior to Mandrake, and does that affect how Mandrake understands his world?
I think there was when you look at the old series, Mig had an aspect of magic, but always felt science based. You know, if you look at the other, but if you go back and you look at the series two, you'll find Kashin and Mandrake had mystic books and mystic lore that clearly was magic based in regards to what that was about. So I think there's a blurry line between the two. Um, and even when you look at the Phantom in the animated series, he had the powers of 10 tigers. That was something that was granted to him. Um, One of the things I liked about the Phantom is the idea that he's a generational character, and then sometimes the ghosts of the previous generations might visit with him. Like you might see his father's ghost come back or something like that. And I like that idea of where he has nobody that he can relate to, and one person he can relate to is dead coming back and talking to him. So that might be something fun we can see happening in the book too.
That's awesome. That's awesome. The prior Phantoms are these ones that used to exist in the comic books that are considered in the past. And like, are there ones that you're more interested in talking? Like, were there certain past Phantoms you're like, this guy definitely be a fascinating character to have visit?
Yeah, well, not to give anything away. Eh. The one thing I'm doing with the Phantom is we found out that he is the 27th Phantom, 27th Phantom as part of lore. So there's a point there where he meets with what I call the Council of Phantoms, which is every Phantom that has come before, and they come there to judge him. And there's a
Oh, that's
moment there.
awesome.
Yeah.
That'd be awesome. That's very cool. I think going back to something you said earlier about the idea of the generational aspect of the story. Um, it sounds like for these heroes, and I might be wrong on this, or I might pick up on it wrong, that they weren't or haven't been the most successful parents. Is that correct?
I can't say that or not. I mean, here's the thing: if you approach it with conceit that prior to this book, the world was at war for a number of years, and it was a war that encompassed every corner of the globe. It's hard to say what good parenting is then when you're fighting for survival.
Hmm.
And one of the very opening sequences in the book, as it's in the final days of the first war with Mongo, um, they ask if the kids are okay, and Lothar explains we got them to a safe house. They're there. We'll make this stand, and they'll live to fight another day. So our heroes are basically organizing to the fact that this might be their final stand, but they made sure that these kids made it to safety, and not just safety in the sense that they'll be able to live their lives, but also they'll be able to take on the fight that they had at another time if they're not able to continue on their own. In that statement alone, that sounds like good parenting and bad parenting simultaneously. But there's a reality to it that ultimately they're being realistic about the world that was going to be after them, and their kids placing it and how they were going to have to be part of what it was. And they didn't expect their children to be complacent and to run and hide. They expected them to be fighters, but they wanted to make sure that they lived to be able to make that fight another time.
Well, it's kind of interesting, as you mentioned before, as being a grandfather. The big idea would be if there was ever a crisis, your priority is always going to be your grandkids and your children versus the world itself. I mean, family first.
But
These four heroes who are responsible for protecting the world, how do you balance your priority of protecting your children versus protecting the world, and do they ever come into conflict, those two?
I think the trick is teaching them how to survive in the world that you're faced with, and if you again go back into the original series, they were very active in the middle of it all. In the story, it's basically Rick that finds his mother dead on Mongo, and ultimately he's affected by that. So he has a personal interest in making this fight his too, because it affected his family. Um, you know, Lothar and LJ. LJ takes on the responsibility of the chieftain of the importance of the Seven Nations. He knows his father has a greater role and that he has a lot of people to watch out for, and therefore, and that role might be his someday. So he understands the authority that comes along with it. With Jeddah, there's the problem of the Phantom, which is there's the ancient lore of the Phantom that the Phantom should always be passed from son to son, from father to son, father to son. And here's our Phantom with a daughter, and she's not theoretically the one who's allowed to become the next Phantom, and that creates a rift right off the start. There's an understanding, but when it comes to the point of who assumes the title of the next Phantom, that's when the rift becomes more apparent, because this is lore that's been passed on through 27 generations, and he's not even sure if he's able to break the tradition, let alone can break the tradition. So there's an issue there. And then with Kashin, since he's not Mandrake's child, there is that a sense that there's not a full connection there between the two, as much as Mandrake would like it to be. And the more Kashin tries to understand and connect with Mandrake, Mandrake being a magician, keeps his cards to himself. So there's not that true emotional connection between the two that you would have between a father and son. And I think that affects Kashin in ways that makes him much more self-reliant than someone who would turn to a parent for advice. So every one of them has a different point of view and a different relationship, which is important because you want to show different dynamics in your story and get the opportunity for different stories with each of the different types of relationships that you have with the cast.
Now, another aspect of the solicitors that are kind of interesting, the solicit state that betrayal lurks in the shadows. Now, does this betrayal exist within the team or without outside the team?
Which one's that? I'm sorry.
The solicit says there's a betrayal that lurks in the shadows.
Yes, there is a betrayal.
In the team or outside the team?
Inside the team. We use the expression, the song in the show goes, how does it go? It goes, 4 become 8. There's a line in the song of the introduction to Defense of Earth, and 4 become 8, and I said, and 1 shall betray them all. But there's some betrayals in there, some known, some unknown, some by choice, some by accident, and we're every one of those things comes into play during the course of the story. It's not an easy ride.
Now you got me wondering, because I mean, these are all characters that people have known for a bit. You're saying this, one of the 8 that we're familiar with is going to be a problem?
Should be, yes.
And when you say betrayal, we talk about straight betrayal, whereas with Ming, or betrayal being viewed in some other type of way?
It's the betrayal is it's the stake of what direction the world should take, and if the team chooses one way and then one person chooses the other, they might see that as a betrayal.
Very interesting. Okay, now you got me wondering. So, for those of us like me wondering, when is the book coming out?
Book's coming out middle of August, first issue. Then it's on 6 weeks after that, so it's first in August, I think October, maybe beginning of December. So every 6 weeks it comes out, which is great. And then there's a Flash Quarterly that's going to be coming out through Mad Cave as well, and we'll have 2 standalone 8-page stories in some of the quarterlies down the road over the course of the year. One of them focuses on Dale and what happened to her, and other one focuses on Crotan, Ming's son, and his role in the whole thing.
So when can we expect the Phantom spinoff series?
What's that? Oh, I don't know. We'll see how the series does. I got a lot of stories. The Phantom's interesting for me because, again, these aren't characters growing up in the New York area, we never got the syndicated strips of the Phantom or Mandrake or Flash Gordon. So, but I mean, knew Flash Gordon naturally through all the media that was involved with him. Phantom, I knew through some comics and through the movie, but I never really read his strip at all. But I know there is a very large Phantom following, so I really want to make sure that we have some real fun stories that are true to that character because I know that there's a real fan base there. And Mandrake, oddly, is the one I'm having the most fun with. He turns out to be the odd glue that keeps the team together while Flash is doing other business, and I find that to be really enjoyable. But the good part is so far I've written the first 4 scripts halfway through the series, and everybody, I think, for the most part, has had a chance to shine. Of the 4 main characters, definitely, and from the kids, some of the kids some big moments too, which is great. So I'm having fun with the story, and I guess that's hopefully that translates to what people are reading.
It's a good time to be an '80s kid, huh?
You know what? It's what's fun for me, and I could have gone 2 ways with this. I can look at what we're doing in comics today and get very introspective, or I can really just blow it out and have a blast. And the reality is, I wanna have fun and blow it out and make it bigger and crazier and more ridiculous and just high adventure and big stakes and everything that comes along with it. Primarily because that's the type of book that I want to read, and it's a point of difference that a lot that you might see in other series today. And I think it's more energetic that way, and I can't really take ourselves too seriously. I really want to have some fun with what we're doing.
Well, like I said, it sounds fantastic. So mid-August, sir, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show. You've been awesome as always. Can't wait to read Defenders of the Earth.
Great. Thanks so much for having me, and I hope you enjoy it too.
Have a good night, sir.
You too. Thanks now.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Versus Stars podcast. Please help me power the algorithms by liking and subscribing. Be sure to for the next episode when David Castaneda joins to discuss the Umbrella Academy on Netflix. To next voyage, travel on.